Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. If you desire to intimately connect with yourself, your significant other, children, family, friends, community, and your higher power, this show is for you. Thus, we explore intimate topics, inspiring life stories, spirituality, and insightful tips on strengthening relationships. This show is hosted by Dr. April and her co-host, Dr. Kelly. Now let's get this episode of the Bringing Intimacy Back show started, because we share with you the secret power to intimacy to create a life you love, or love the life you create. Now here's your host, Dr. April, and co-host, Dr. Kelly.
Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. Yes. Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Kelly. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You know what I did today?
What did you do today?
I did canning. You know, when you you cut up your vegetables and then you steam them in a pot and yeah.
Yes, I remember doing that when I was little with my grandma in Charleston, South Carolina. I miss that. Yeah, we used to pick the peas and pick stuff and then go through the process of canning.
Oh yeah, my niece's neighbor gave us the tomatoes, so I was like, hey, I'm all to it. And it's a process.
Yes, but it's so healthy. You know what I'm saying? That touch of being back and eating real food.
Oh, absolutely. This is some real food. I mean, I picked them off the vine and I have 12 quarts of stewed tomatoes.
Yes. Good. You know, the last time I had some really good, like real authentic food was in Costa Rica when I recently went there. Yeah, it was wonderful.
I bet.
Yes.
Costa Rica.
Yes, definitely. And in Costa Rica, everything's so natural and authentic, and the people and the culture, which is what we're talking about today.
Cultural intimacy.
Yes. From around the world, definitely. However, before we get started into that, I want to let everyone know about my third ebook that's coming out. And it's kind of some of what we're talking about today, which is improving intimacy, but everyday expressions. Because even with culture, it's every day. You know, it's, yes.
Especially in our society. I mean, there's some places in this world where it's like 1% of a different culture or 2%. But for the most part, I mean, especially where you live in Southwest Florida. I don't know where our guest, Michael O'Brien, is from, but it touches our lives in so many different ways. So it's important.
Right. And especially as we come upon this upcoming weekend of September 11th, I think culture is very important in understanding and being respectful of different cultures. Yes. So before we get into Michael's a great person. I want to introduce him in a moment, but I also want to let our audience know about our charity of the month, which is our Mother's Home. It's an organization that I worked with this summer that helps young teen moms. So if you're interested in that, please go to www.ourmothershome.net. Well, now let me welcome a good friend of mine, a colleague, someone that I've gotten to know, Michael O'Brien. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Yeah.
Yes. So Michael is actually a sociologist by trade and a therapist who's been around different cultures and stuff with over 20 years of experience. Michael is also a professor, and he's worked as a professor in Chicago, here in Florida at FIU. And now congratulations, Michael, for FGCU.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm doing constructing online courses for them.
Yes, definitely. And Michael's in our local neck of the woods, Dr. Kelly. I'm in Naples.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm in South Florida too. Beautiful, sunny South Florida, I might add.
And Michael and I, we had a conversation almost about over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. About culture and how that impacts, especially where we live in Southwest Florida. So yes, so welcome, Michael, to the show.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and as the two of you were talking, all those different ways in which we do everyday things. And I like what you said, Dr. April, about the fact that it's in the everyday things and the small things, because that's absolutely what the sort of cultural anthropologists believe, right? It's the little things we do. It's the way we eat, the way we don't eat. And intimacy is a great example of seeing how different cultures do things differently, right? Just how we interact, how we hug, how we greet each other, right? What is okay and not okay. So it's a very interesting topic for me personally as well as professionally.
Yes. So, Michael, we start off by asking each guest, how do you define intimacy?
So I was thinking about that, and I looked at a few different definitions you have for today. For me, it's a feeling. Okay, so and given what we do professionally, right, we're talking a lot about feelings. It's about a feeling of warmth. It's about, so just hearing the word conjures for me personally a feeling. It's about closeness. It's about warmth. It's about connection. Some of which is private. So I'm going to stick with intimacy is about connection and warmth. That's my personal definition of how it feels for me.
Right, definitely. And like I said, I don't know if you remember that conversation. Maybe it's been 2 years now.
Going on 2 years, yeah.
Yeah. When you and I traveled together, and we were talking about culture and how that impacts, because each of us have been impacted by culture. And before we even get to culture, from a sociologist, can you define what culture is?
So culture is a really all-encompassing definition, and it means the entire life ways of a particular group. So what that means is it's the way we do everything and the way we even approach things. And group can mean anything because we go in and out of groups, right? So, and that's what got me thinking when you were first talking about this show, the idea that there's sort of a US culture, right? There's something we consider US culture. There's norms we have in the culture, how we greet each other, how we interact. But then also within any place, there are many, many groups, what we would call subcultures, right? This is the sociological term, subcultures. So, friends could be a subculture, a club you belong to. The way we interact professionally with clients is very different, has a certain set of ethical standards and guidelines that differs from our personal life. So it's the entire life ways of a given group. And that includes the norms, the values, the interactions, and even just how we approach what we do.
That's concise. I like it. A lot of times people neglect to talk about the subcultures.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's always this dominant, and I'm going to throw out a couple of these sociological, there's this dominant culture, right, in any country, in any group. In other words, the dominant way things are done, the main way. So we go to a job interview in U.S. culture, we're probably already conjuring certain images. We're looking someone straight in the eye, we're a firm handshake, all those sort of things. But within any group, there are subgroups, and we go in and out of the subgroups, right? So there's not just one sort of okay way of doing things. There's multiple ways within each of the groups that we connect with. So we go to a job interview, we're dressed and acting a certain way. When we meet our friends later, we're probably acting and looking a different way, right? That's an example of subculture.
Yeah, I like how you said there's different ways to do things. Yeah. And for some people, they have a hard time with that, especially in today's culture, that if you don't do things my way.
That's right. And I think that's where, on a societal level, we get into trouble because people, I think some people just don't even know what we're talking about right now. The fact that there are differences, different norms. And I think specifically of that friend greeting, I was introduced to some of these differences very early on, probably unusually early on because I'm Mexican American. And we would go visit family, as a baby and as a small child. And literally the way we would greet each other would be different than I would greet my American family, which is more of that firm handshake and a hello. We always would sort of embrace each other, right? And if you go to a barbershop, a Black-owned barbershop, a Hispanic barbershop, you'll notice this as well. There's a lot more touching than there is in any of the American barbershops that I've gone to in my life. So you'll see much more, sort of hand clenching as opposed to, a regular sort of European style handshake, more embracing, things like that. So we really start to see those differences once we open our eyes to them. And I think that's a good point that you just made. We have to be attuned to the fact that there are these differences in order to be able to see them. What do you think about that?
I liked when you explained about the norms, when you talked about the word norms, and even within today's culture and today's society, it's changing. Mm-hmm. Whereas we used to hug more. And I'm wondering about the cultural intimacy and how it's being impacted in society with the pandemic, because people aren't hugging. And I'm lecturing in the classroom now, and we have to wear masks. And some of the illustrations that I use, I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. And I wait, oh, wait, we can't do that. My whole entire lectures, and I know as a professor, you can relate to this, both of you educators. It's like the norms are changing.
How do you feel about that? Like, how comfortable are you?
It's so awkward.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't resonate with me. I'm like, where do I belong? I mean, I'm the professor. I should be able to communicate this, but so much of my communication has relied on hands-on learning. So if we translate that to what the norm is in cultural intimacy now and how we interact with people, whether in a barber shop or somewhere else.
Well, and I think of it in practice too. The first couple months of when I returned to the office, and maybe Dr. Abel can speak to this point too, it was tough for me not to shake hands. It took several months. I had a way of doing this. This is, sort of a subcultural thing. I would shake hands with the person, offer them water or coffee or something. Well, all of a sudden, in the midst of COVID, I'm not offering them to hand them a cup of coffee, nor am I shaking their hand. So I found myself on autopilot often, right? Because once we do these things, it gets ingrained into our neural pathways and all that. So I would start to like awkwardly reach out and they would, and then I would be like, whoa, we're not supposed to do that. And so, and even that felt like at least there was a level of closeness when I would shake somebody's hand and then like welcome them in. But now, like you say, we're having to keep a distance, and it feels awkward at the very least.
So what are we left with, right? We're left with communicating with words and with our eyes. And in some cultures, eye contact is considered invasive.
Absolutely. One of my closest friends in my PhD program is Japanese. And so he came from Japan to do his PhD at FIU. And we had a lot of interesting conversations about this, you can imagine, because of the differences. Like we got to sit and talk about the fact that, how in US culture, we're a little more confrontational. We might not think we are, but we'll go stand up to the other person literally and like look them right in the eye, right? And, possibly even be a little close, especially we saw this a lot with confrontations with COVID. In his culture, he said to me, his exact words were that you just don't see that, especially in the context of like respect for a professor or a doctor or someone. You keep a greater distance between the people. You're not, sort of looking them in the eye like that. So big differences. And if you didn't know that, it could appear, and he's told me that at times people thought maybe he was standoffish or something like that. But it's just his normal, just like it was my normal to, sort of walk up to the person and, stick my hand out for them to shake. Just different.
Right, definitely. And like you said, sometimes we don't know the norm and we can do something that can be disrespectful. So how do we, as we're, as a community coming together, meeting with different people, there's masses, how do we figure out what do we do in all this? Well, when we come back, we're going to take a short break. I want you to think about that and give us some answers, and we'll be back in a moment.
Are you wanting a vacation in paradise? A vacation to rekindle the passion? A vacation without the kids? A vacation where you can learn how to communicate, where you and your partner actually hear each other and gain insight? If so, vacation counseling is your next vacation. Dr. April Brown has created vacation counseling in Southwest Florida as a perfect option for you and your partner. Our retreats are one couple at a time. We have a variety of packages available to choose from, including virtual couples retreats. If you and your partner are interested in the vacation counseling, please visit us at vacationcounseling.com for more information on pricing and packages. Also, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To keep track of the latest news, stories, activities, or coupons on vacation counseling and Dr. April's other services, we encourage you to sign up to receive a monthly newsletter called Intimate Connections at draprilbrown.com. Remember, if you and your partner are struggling with communication and intimacy, and you all are looking for a retreat to connect, vacation counseling can be your next vacation in Southwest Florida.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. So, Michael, we were just talking about, and with Dr. Kelly, about different norms and culture and how do we connect and what is respectful and not respectful. How do we figure all this out?
Well, I think on the one hand, considering the fact that there are so many different ways and so many groups, and the idea that we go in and out of these groups in any given day, right? So for those of us, and I know Dr. April is, I'm sure Dr. Kelly, you're attuned to it as well. When we go in and out of these groups, we're aware of those differences, right? So I think there's sort of some groups in America who maybe in all countries as well, but who aren't as open to seeing these differences, okay? And we don't have to like it or dislike it. So I want to kind of put that judgment on reserve, but just sort of accepting the reality that these differences are there, I think are a big step. My suggestion is to sort of take a breath when we're in these situations, literally, as you know, mindfulness is one of my mainstays of my therapeutic interventions. So taking a breath, observing what's around us. We have to have a willingness to see what the other groups are doing. And I have an example. When I moved, I'm born and raised in Chicago. Okay, so Chicago is the city of big shoulders, right? People get things done. It's a very pragmatic city, settled by, it was settled by indigenous people, and then German farmers came and settled the areas around Chicago and in Chicago. So it's a very sort of direct handshake, maybe a hug is how you would greet somebody normally, that sort of thing. So when I moved to Miami, I started getting uncomfortable right off the bat because everybody does this little sort of cheek to cheek kissing in the air, yes. Right? And when I say everybody, it really is pretty much everybody.
Yes.
Yes. Like the two kisses or three kisses. Some countries are three kisses.
Right.
In some are two. Yes.
And for me personally, from where I come from, that's kind of intimate. It's a little too intimate for me to just first meet somebody, or I met them once, and to be kissing them. That's right. So I did everything I could to resist. I mean, literally putting physical barriers at times. Like I'd stand behind a chair and like wave. So I did, yeah.
You don't like kissing strangers, Michael?
Even hearing that makes me just a slight bit uncomfortable. Not really. I said, it's not my norm. My norm is that firm handshake or a Chicago hug, like, and then you move on with whatever you're doing. But so I literally would like stand behind something to see what would happen, right? Because I'm this budding sociologist and I'm going to figure this out with testing. And it didn't stop people. People anyways would, knock that out, come over here and kiss me. So I did eventually incorporate that. I sort of took a breath and said, okay, what am I going to do here? Am I going to spend the rest of my life, hiding behind appliances? Or am I going to find a way to meet these people where they're at and blend it into how I do it? And so, but I think there was a valuable lesson there that even for somebody who's aware of these issues can be made to feel uncomfortable. So I empathize with people and their potential feelings of discomfort. And I think that's where we, have common ground. I think that's the issue in the US. I think people get uncomfortable with other people's differences. I don't think it's as much they don't like it. It's just the discomfort.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Michael, when they were like surprised, did anybody say, well, I thought you were Mexican American? Like, did they infer that, hey, you should be comfortable. Aren't you Mexican?
Yeah, and that's funny too, because when we would visit my family, they did it that way as well, my family there. So now, I'm thinking, well, I'm starting to notice all these different, there isn't just one way of being even for me. But I did get some of that because it was like, well, how come you're not doing it too? Because for them, it's not intimate. For them, it's the equivalent of my handshake. But then sort of fast forward, and when I would go back to Chicago, I did eventually start doing that automatically. And this is absolutely a true story. I remember neighbors, a good friend of my mom's, neighbors of ours where I grew up, and I went to kiss her on the cheek, and she was very taken aback, And again, I was hit in the face by this realization about these differences and just how ingrained it is for all of us to have these differences, right? And to react to them. But yes, now I'm much more attuned to these different ways, and I take a breath and, how's this person doing it? But, it's handshakes, it's hugs, it's kisses. That's intimacy. For me, it's intimate to have that skin contact, to kiss. It's not intimate to me to shake hands. Whereas for my Japanese friend, there's even a level of intimacy if you get into their physical space, right? They're standing a little further apart.
Mm-hmm. And it's not to infer, for those of you that are listening, it's not to infer that this person is not a warm person. It's just that people have even different personal spaces. Right. So for our listeners, I want to tell you, if you want to call in and ask Michael or Dr. April or myself a question, you can call in at 1-888-627-6008.
Yes. And so, Michael, I was just thinking, as we were talking about kissing and handshaking and touches, with this pandemic, it's brought also another type of culture that there is no really sometimes skin to skin contact. And there's some of us who maybe haven't been touched or kissed or no skin contact.
In a very long time, I might add, perhaps, hypothetically.
Yes. Yes. So from a sociologist's point of view, what is that doing to us as humans in the world?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of clients I've even had this week. So I think people are still at the local level, at the grassroots, what I call the grassroots level. I think a lot of them are still, doing things that are sort of prohibited. So like the hookup culture with younger folks. Okay. I've had a couple younger clients this week that are on websites. One is on Grindr, right? He happens to be gay, so
right. But doesn't mean that they grind, that.
Right, and it doesn't mean that they're intimate by everybody's definition. It might be a little bit more, a less intimate encounter that might,
Yes.
But so I think therein lies the difference of the definitions, right? So on a larger cultural level, right, we have these norms. We're not supposed to be doing certain kinds of things. So in practice, I'm elbow bumping or I'm not even touching at all. But I think maybe behind closed doors, maybe people are still doing some of these things. I don't think it's good in the end to have too much space between us, right? Mm-hmm. We know that there's certain physical, biological, chemical things that we get from interacting with other people closely. Besides just the sense of closeness, certain things from skin contact, like you said, certain positive things, even from orgasm and some other things, right, that right. We don't get, right? So it definitely affected people. And I saw a rush of couples clients right after the pandemic. I don't know, Dr. April, if you did too.
Yeah. I still see a lot of them and touch is something that's lacking.
Yes. And it is a part of almost anybody's definition of intimacy, right? Touch, a level of closeness. So when we have masks on, when we're keeping distance, it's one thing at the store, but hopefully people are finding ways to sort of to have their own subcultural experience that differs from the dominant. I don't know. That's a good question, though.
Right. What are some suggestions go ahead, Dr. April.
No, I was just thinking from what you were saying that maybe even in the sense of your young people, that sometimes if you haven't been touched or kissed and it's or whatever the case may be, no skin to skin contact, mm-hmm. you get to the point where you need it so much, you become desperate, which mm-hmm. leads to sometimes irrational thoughts, mm-hmm. behaviors, actions.
Yeah, that's a good point too, that maybe it pushes people in too far in the other direction. In general, with society, I think we find an equilibrium. I don't think we've found it yet. I don't, but usually we do. History proves itself if we study the history of social interaction and just of societies. Usually there's, this is not the first time that we've undergone a radical change. I think of things that were even bigger, like World War II, for example. Where much of Europe was in chaos and starving, literally. So there are lots of times throughout history we've had other epidemics and pandemics. I think we'll find an equilibrium. I think humans just sort of seek that without even knowing it. I don't know what that's going to look like because this is still ongoing, especially here in Florida. Our numbers are still soaring of COVID infections. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think people will find it. right? Because I think it's just too important and people need it too much, the interaction.
How can people be open to other forms of intimacy?
I think educating themselves, right? Knowing that there isn't just one way of doing everything. I have a discussion with people often about, the idea of free will and choice and things like that. It's difficult to say we have much free will and choice if we don't know what the options are, right? If we think there's only one way of doing something and we do it automatically. An example I give, because occasionally there's like an 18 or 19-year-old freshman college student who's resistant to the idea that they might not know everything. So, yeah. So I say, when you first went in an elevator, or when you rode the elevator today, at what point do you remember somebody explaining to you the rules for how you ride in that elevator? Well, of course, there's no such thing as that. We know how to ride an elevator, how to greet somebody, how to eat, based on our culture and watching other people do it, right? Most knowledge is implicit, right? We're not told how to do it. We walk into an elevator and we're supposed to kind of look up, right?
You're not supposed to say group hug.
Right. Right. Especially now, right. I'd like to see that though. I want to, if you plan on doing that, let me record that.
I have done that at the elevator there at Hodges University, and people just look. Now this was like 5 years ago. So, but I would wonder what it would happen if I say it now. I'd get a different response. Nobody did do a group hug, by the way, but now I'm sure that they would get a different response. I would, because you see, before I was using humor because nobody was talking. And now it would be something completely different because we're not supposed to hug in elevators.
We're not supposed to hug and touch and, smoke cigars. And, instead we're supposed to pretend we're looking at our phones, even though there's no reception. Wink, wink, But so, and I think that has to do with also a closed space kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. That we're close to each other. And I think a lot of people don't know how to do that, right? This is also gendered to an extent, intimacy, right? So, when is it okay in greater US culture for males to touch each other? And I mean, we know it's okay as therapists and as individuals, it's okay for anyone, but it seems to be based a lot around sports and contact sports. So you'll see football if you watch it on TV on Sundays, and you'll see men slapping each other on the butt. You don't see it as much in a mall, in a school, right? Right. It'd be unusual, but it seems to be okay. It's linked to violence. It's linked to the camaraderie of the game, things like that. So why is it not okay in other contexts? Well, in fact, it is. It's just not okay for that individual, possibly. But I think that's very interesting when you start bringing things like that up with people, and noticing that there are times when it is okay or perceived okay, right?
Well, especially for you talked about gender. What about for a boy or a man to say, "I need a hug"?
That's a great one.
I actually had a client once that was ridiculed at school because he had asked a girl to snuggle, and he used the word snuggle in a sentence as a teenager. So, boy, did he get ridiculed.
Mm-hmm. And it makes men's life more difficult, I believe, right? The fact that it's not as perceived as okay. And I go back to childhood, right? So if you're thinking about how a boy and a girl were comforted, it was a pretty common sight for me to see girls comforted by each other physically, right? A hug, literally gathering around her, so physical thing. It's just not that common with a male. If a male says he's hurting or he's crying or he's upset, you're generally not going to have a group of men come and sort of hug him and surround him.
Play with his hair.
Right. Just think even saying that, right? In a classroom, this elicits a lot of laughs, obviously, because playing with his hair, just holding him, dabbing his tears, it's like.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm a woman.
Yes.
It must be so hard on guys.
Well, and we wonder why some men have this issue with hypermasculinity, where they cover up, right? Because they still get hurt. Obviously, they're humans.
Right, but they were told not to express their emotions.
Not to express their emotions, and not even to ask for that soothing that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. there's a gentleman in his upper 60s that I work with, and he, I'd asked him when he was a child, who was the caregiver who, when he was hurt, whether it's physically or emotionally, took care of him or soothed him or, addressed that. And he burst into tears, and he said he never remembers one time anybody doing that. And so, he has a hard time now reaching out and expressing feelings, and it's unfortunate, because I think society would be healthier, right, if more people could reach out for help, if more people were attuned to these differences with regard to the way we do things, whether it's intimacy or whether it's reaching out, because there is a level of intimacy, I think, in reaching out to somebody and wanting to, and then getting that support, right?
Right. And I was just even thinking, and this is a global thing, but even in the sense of the pandemic, it's not a Florida pandemic. It's not a United States pandemic. It is a global pandemic. And I know most of the countries are led by men, which is okay, but we're not taking a global approach or asking for help and so I was just thinking to myself, I wonder if part of that is because of what you just said, in the sense of, growing up, that, men were taught not to ask for help and because if we looked at it more as a global, instead of each country and their own budget and whatever case maybe.
That's an interesting point. And that gets to why, like your perspective is different than mine, even though I'm obviously very open to these kinds of things. Like I didn't even think of that exact thing that you just thought of. But yes, I do think that plays a role because, my political science background, I'm pretty well versed on international relations theory. And basically the prevailing theories are like, we're in a free for all, in the world, and we have to only do for ourselves and all that. That's a pretty aggressive, sort of mentality. And like you said, everybody wanted to blame each other's countries. Right. So it's China's responsible. Well, half the world's blaming the United States for not taking enough precautions.
And then people within the United States are blaming Florida, and then they're blaming spring break. I mean, it just can be completely distilled.
Right.
Yes. If we only had more intimacy
and cooperation. So, and that gets back to the intimacy, the connection. I think a lot of it is based on fear. I'd like to hear what you two think, but I think just intimacy, period, whether it's standing in an elevator, when Dr. Kelly, you say, let's group hug, and everyone is probably terrified, right? And looking down even further like this. I think it scares people. I think that openness, right? To be open, we have to be, somewhat confident. We have to be maybe not scared to be open to another person's ways of doing things. What do you all think about that?
I think
some people actually think that intimacy is more about affection, but also we can look at cultural intimacy from language and communication, because what about people that, we can't touch now and, the way that we used to, or as freely, but how can we connect with people through communication? What are some suggestions that either of you, Michael, what would you suggest how somebody could have cultural intimacy through communication?
Yeah, I think I've done that. I think we've probably all have done that in the work that we do. And that is by, sort of using warmer words, right? There's like cold words, warm words, or judgmental words, using more welcoming words, right? I've noticed a little more exaggeration with body movement, maybe even, right? Because I can't touch the person and hand them drinks and such. So maybe there's a little more of that. Maybe there even the talking about the discomfort. I've done that as well, bringing that up, right? Whereas before it's more perfunctory, it's more automatic, where we just kind of do our sort of motions and we come and sit down and we go to it. So I think that demonstrates in and of itself a level of openness and intimacy. I mean, we come from professions where we're sort of required to be more open than probably typical. But I think that helps too, because it lets other people know that we too are trying to figure this out. We don't have all the answers to how to do everything. We're learning. So I think letting other people know that, and I did. There was a few times I was like, well, I'm not sure what to do. And I told the person that, right? It lets them be part of the process. It shows them that I too am not 100% sure about how to move forward with this. And it does come out too and you know, I had a lot of people who are resistant to doing teletherapy. And I had somebody explicitly say that they really didn't think it was going to help them the same as it would be in person. And so those are things we didn't need to address before, right? Because for a while, that's all I did. And I know some people are still only doing that. So I think to your point, I think it's a great point, Dr. Kelly, that talking about it is the way that I cope with that. And the tool that I use is literally just putting it out there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's also when you talked about fear, it's also like you were saying, being open, that vulnerability, you know, that,
Yeah.
hey, I don't have it all together. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take questions from the audience and talk about vulnerability and intimacy and how we can strengthen the bond of connections as we move forward to 2021 and hopefully a better 2022. We'll be back in a moment.
If you're listening, you have a pulse. If you have a pulse, you have stress. If you have stress, you should get a therapist. How do you find a therapist? You go online, type in therapist near me. Then you find a list of letters. LMHC, LPC, NCC. Ugh! How can you navigate and understand all this? Go to drkellyboucher.com. Dr. Kelly specializes in supporting people who suffer from stress, anxiety, burnout, and more. You can have help today. drkellyboucher.com.
Welcome back to the Bring Intimacy Show, where intimacy is real. We've been talking with Michael O'Brien and Dr. Kelly Boucher about cultural intimacy. Dr. Kelly, do you have any questions from the audience?
I do. Actually, I have Amber from Connecticut has a question about, doesn't say which culture, but says, I'm dating somebody from a vastly different culture. Can you help me understand how to communicate? So that's to infer that you're having a difficult time communicating, I'm sure.
Yes.
It'd be interesting to know which culture. What would you recommend, Michael?
Well, asking about these things, I think a great question to ask somebody is what intimacy means to them, right? It is going to be different. For some people, it's going to be more physical. For some people, it's going to be, you know, more about emotional connection. You know, it may be a mix. It's going to differ from subgroup to subgroup. For example, there might be differences with regard to males and females, with regard to what ethnic group you're from, religion, you know, is going to be a big one. So I think, you know, asking somebody about these things is the easiest way to go. I'll have people on my, you know, when I have couples in, and sometimes I'll have one person sort of asking me the questions about their partner. Why does so-and-so do this? Why does he or she do this? I don't understand it. And I'll gently suggest that they ask the person sitting next to them.
Yes.
You know, it's more important to ask them than me, right? So the communication part, asking them their preferred way of communicating love. You know, what's your love languages? I think sometimes doing these assessments, even though they're not all like sort of scientific, can be helpful as well, right? So doing an assessment about what your love language is. But definitely just the open communication about asking them and also observing them in the context of their cultural background, I think helps a lot, right? How do they interact with family, with friends, so that we can sort of, you know, be open to their way of doing things.
And observe, I would say, Amber, observe how they interact with their family and how they communicate with their family. Mm-hmm. See, communication is so important for intimacy. In fact, I say try to withhold. Now, correct, this is what I say for dating. I used to say to teenagers, you know, try to hold off kissing as long as you can so that you can become, you know, more intimate. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, it's hard to communicate with somebody's tongue in your mouth, right? So the communication stops when the physical begins sometimes. So make sure you have a healthy balance with that. Do you have any questions, Dr. April, from the audience?
I was just going to say on the end of that question is also understanding how a culture deals with conflict. Because I was thinking, like in some cultures, if there's a problem, we discuss it right then and there. Who cares who's around or what's saying? In others, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want so-and-so to know, well, we have to wait till we get home, which happens a lot in communication. Yes, with
Absolutely.
couples.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see, and right, we'll hear this and see this in their explanations of how their conflict happens. And then we'll hear, I'll ask let's see, how, when you were a child, who was the disciplinarian or something like that? And it'll start getting pretty clear about why they have these differences. Because we'll hear like, well, this, my husband walks away and doesn't want to talk about it. And I want to solve it right then and there, what's wrong with him, or vice versa. It's just that they're doing it differently. So if there was a mutual understanding, maybe things would go better. And I like your point, Dr. Kelly, about that. Right. So, going to something physical very quickly can often be avoidance, I think, right? Avoidance of having to figure those things out.
Yeah. So I do have a question. It's from Joe. I'm actually from Florida. And he's saying as different people come moving into this country, they should really adopt to the American culture. I don't understand why we would tolerate all these different cultures.
Can I answer to that?
Yes, you can.
So there's no one thing. So there's no such thing as American culture. There sort of is and sort of isn't, right? We're back to that dominant and not dominant. There definitely is no one American culture. What is it? Point to it. Tell me what it is, right? Is it eating tacos? Because there's taco places now everywhere. And we live in a place, Naples, where there are really expensive taco places.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So is that American culture, or is it the hamburger place? So the beginning point is a little bit, needs to be a little bit teased out in the fact that there is no one American culture. There are many, many, many subcultures, and there always have been in America. Yes, there tends to be one sort of dominant way of doing things. I think it's healthy for both parties to meet each other where they're at. Mm-hmm. And, what we call cultural infusion, where things sort of are mixed. I think that's the only possible way for a society to function healthily, or an individual or a couple, right? To adopt some of each other's ways of doing. And we do this. This is why we have like Tex-Mex food. We want to get really literal, right? Literally the mixing of cultures. It's not quite Mexican. It's not quite American. It's a mix. This is a common thing. It's not new, and it's been going on for forever.
Yeah, I was going to say on that point, I remember back in the day, they used to teach us about a melting pot. Mm-hmm. And then it went into more of a salad. Where do you stand on that? Yeah,
because right. So I think a melting pot is very flawed because it makes it sound like everything, literally melts into each other, which is not the case. Right? It's not the case. Take the fist bump, for example. I remember when Barack Obama was president and he occasionally fist bumped people. And I remember there was a lot of people on the web that didn't like that. Well, it's just a different way, right? It's maybe not, I'm sure he shook hands with some people, but with some people it was a fist bump. In my own private life with friends and people I train in martial arts with and such, we're fist bumping. We're not shaking hands, and we always did. So there's no one way of doing anything, and we don't melt into stuff. We're these differences. We're vegetables chopped up, right? Or pieces are in whole, and we're in the same bowl, but that doesn't mean we have to take on all the characteristics of the other person. And I think that's a very damaging thing too. No one is saying that you have to become like the people that are coming in or the other group, but perhaps just being open to being okay with their way of doing it. So like, use your salad metaphor, the green pepper is maybe not interfering with the lettuce, and eating the two together is probably tastes better. If you see where my head's at, I'm getting hungry, but yeah. It tastes better when the flavors, are sitting together. But yeah, I think it's very flawed to think that everything sort of just melts into one thing, because it really isn't true.
What I would say too, also to individuals like Joe as the question or the thought, like saying, I really think that, how should I be expected to tolerate all these different cultures? I live in America. I'd be like, Joe, just don't date somebody from a different culture. And then guess what, Joe? You're going to be very lonely for a very long time. because we all have a different culture, even within our same, like I'm in Northern Michigan right now. So, I mean, it's like 2%. Like I was 14 years old.
What?
2%, it's all white.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
2% is a different culture where I
Yeah.
live, and I went from Florida to Northeast Michigan. So it's kind of like, but even within that, there are so many different cultures. So it's really not about ethnicity or race. It is about culture. So Joe, you're really going to be up a creek if you do not handle the fact that this is a personal thing. And it's really, you can have intimacy with individuals, and it's a lonely life if you don't figure out how. It's not about tolerating. It's about celebrating.
Yeah, and also I was thinking, are you there from there originally, Dr. Kelly? Are you from Michigan?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay, so similar neck of the woods to Chicago, Northern Illinois. I mean,
right. Yeah.
So we can also look at this over time. I mean, that's the other thing in teaching. Sort of to Joe's question, these things have changed radically over time. They differ from place to place, so that's a great point, right? So. And I was talking about my Chicago versus Miami, but they've also differed drastically over time. What was seen as okay for people to do and what was considered intimate. I saw a picture recently of people on the beach in the 1800s and the women like showing their ankles, being very, out there and sexual, showing their ankles, right?
Yes.
Being very saucy, right?
Yes.
Well, if you live in South Florida, you see more than that. Right. So it's a different time. Right.
Yes.
So it's not the case that this is a static thing, that this culture is static. It changes drastically over time. And sexuality and intimacy for sure has changed over time. Right. We think of Victorian as covering everything up. Right. When people and sociologists look at cultures through time, Victorian times, it was about covering up everything, long dresses, multiple layers of stuff. Now, not so much. So at what point are we using that sort of, this is our culture thing? It differs from 50 years ago to now, and it's going to be different in another 20 to 50 years, to your point. And if we don't acclimate to these differences, we get left behind a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. I admire you for asking that question, Joe, because that's very direct communication, and I respect that. And it is good for us to ask these questions.
For sure.
Definitely. Thank you, Michael, so much for being on the show.
Thank you, ladies. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So if people are out there listening, how can they connect with you? And also tell us a little bit about this mindfulness that.
Yeah. So I've been practicing mindfulness for a very long time, 15, 20 years. I got to see the Dalai Lama in person. And so basically, one of the things I like about it, coming from a culture where, do it yourself is, especially for, males, this is something you can just sort of do on your own. Find a breathing exercise, right? Breathe slowly. We can always control our breath. We can't control all these things we're talking about, right? We can't control what's going to happen with COVID, what's going on in the world. We can always control our breath. If you want to reach out, my business line is 239-330-7883. I hold office and telehealth appointments. Office is in Naples in the French Quarter. And basically the idea of mindfulness is to be aware of what we're doing and what we're experiencing and then letting go. So this very much applies to the topic we're talking about, because we don't have to like the way the other person does things, right? So if I prefer and I feel more comfortable with shaking hands, it's okay that I don't like and prefer the other ways. It just means not judging them based on the way I do it. It's a very different thing. So it's being aware and then simply letting go of it. Okay, so you do it differently. That's okay. It's very non-judgmental. I think it gets us out of that trap of like, which way do we go with it? Do we go with my way or do we go with your way? Well, that's a very, sort of assertive, aggressive way of looking at it. We don't have to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, because Michael, you and I have talked, and I know that you've experienced some racial injustice. Mm-hmm. And you shared something that happened in Naples. And I was just thinking, you know what? How you dealt with that, of the police. Mm-hmm. it's a lot of it's because of your practice of mindfulness.
For sure. Actually,
you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes. And
yeah, you know what instant I'm talking about.
I do. And, you know, I do have I've developed a good ability. I didn't always have it. And that's the one thing I tell my clients. People, you know, sort of look at you now and say, well, you have this all figured out. Well, I mean, you know, I've been through some stuff to get where I've gotten. And it's the result of years of practice and the fact that I do these things regularly. But I'm able to stay in the moment and sort of really keep aware of what's going on for me as I'm doing things. That helps in all facets. It helps with stressful interactions like the one you're talking about. It helps when I teach. So in a variety of contexts, it's useful for pretty much everything. So I'm like such a huge proponent that, you know, it's improved my life on a personal level, but for sure in these stressful situations where, you know, we're not in control, because that's inevitably what the feeling is. It's a loss of control. So, you know, sort of the police lights get thrown on and we see them, everybody gets a little bit nervous when that happens, I believe. You know, I've asked people, I've asked classes, and everybody gets nervous. But we need to stay present. We need to be aware of what we're experiencing and what we're feeling in order to be able to be our best self. Because in the end, I know what all three of us want, right? We want people to be their best selves. And I think that helps.
And I think that most people really do want to be better and have, you know, be kinder and have a better self. And certainly no surprise that we have like podcasts going out the roof. Like people are educating themselves and learning. And so thank you so much for that, Michael.
You're welcome.
And speaking about podcasts going through the roof, congratulations, Dr. April, on the Bringing Intimacy Back show, which many of you know or may not know that it's in its 11th year. So the first 10, you know, over a decade of doing this, and you're in the top 200 for Apple Podcast on relationships here at the Bringing Intimacy Back show. Congratulations on that. So for those of you that are
help this year.
Oh, you're welcome. So subscribe to the Bringing Intimacy Back show on your favorite podcast, whether it's Apple or whatever other player you're listening to. Subscribe, follow us on Instagram, of course, Facebook and YouTube. And also you can write a review on iTunes if you're listening on iTunes. Our upcoming shows are Laying Your Retirement Foundation with Jim Magadons next week. Nikki Nash, Unlocking Your Genius. That sounds so cool. That's like IQ is sexy, isn't it? Sitting with God. I went from saying sexy to God in the same. September 30th with Rich Lewis, Sitting with God. You know, be still and know that he is God. October 7th is Jorge and Denise Suarez, Affair Recovery. I'm so interested in that. So thanks so much for listening. It's been great spending time with you, Michael O'Brien.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Michael, again. And thank you, Dr. Kelly. You guys are welcome back. Of course, Michael, anytime. Yes.
Wonderful.
And this has been the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. See you guys next week. Bye.
See you then.
Bye.